Alternate Focus recently spoke with Ambassador Manuel Hassassian, the head of the Palestinian General Delegation to the United Kingdom. Born in Jerusalem, Hassassian received his PhD in political science from the University of Cincinnati. He spent 25 years as a professor of political science and international relations at Bethlehem University and has served as a visiting scholar at universities across Europe and the United States. Hassassian has published over 100 reviews, articles, and chapters on topics ranging from Palestinian political culture to civic society and Palestinian refugees. He has served as the president of UNESCO's Palestinian European American Cooperation in Education program, known as the Peace Program. He has also represented and served as a consultant for the PLO in numerous negotiations. We spoke with the ambassador about a range of issues, from the Arab Spring to the feasibility of a two-state solution, but began by asking him to take a step back and explain the story of the Palestinians over the last century.
The Palestinian problem started basically with the beginning of the Zionist colonization of Palestine. Unfortunately, the Allied powers that promised us to give us independence have reneged on us by making double pledges to the Arabs and to the Zionists that they will have, their own national home in Palestine. For almost 100 years now, this protracted conflict between Palestinians and Israelis have long so far that it added more than one dimension to it. It's not only the territorial conflict that we are, fighting for, as much as there are other added dimensions to this conflict, which makes it protracted, which makes it scary to us as Palestinians, is that the Israelis are injecting now and infusing into the conflict the religious dimension. And that religious dimension takes us back to zero conflict, where the Israelis are being more interested today in the geography of Palestine and not in the demography. From that perspective, I see that we are back to zero-sum conflict with the Israelis, regardless that we have embarked on an onslaught of a peace process that proved nothing except more settlement activities, more settlers living in the occupied territories, and to the extent that today Jerusalem is being totally threatened by the Judaization process. So this conflict is not only a national conflict, it is a religious conflict, and I can summarize it that today our struggle is a struggle for existence with the Israelis. To be or not to be, that is the challenging questions for us. And as a strategy for the Palestinians, we, of course, have failed dismally in using armed struggle against, Israel. But in the final analysis, we're using peaceful strategies of steadfastness and peaceful resistance. And this is the only way where Israel has to deal with us on that level, on the level of being, steadfasting on our land and believing that we will never repeat what happened in 1948, because the sense of awareness among Palestinians have been so high to the fact that we thought, and we still think, that a two-state solution might be doable, but given the current circumstances, I, even as a diplomat who is espousing a two-state solution, when I go to Palestine and look at the ground, I cannot see this happening with the cancerous settlement activities, with the building of the wall, this apartheid wall. I think Israel is aborting the two-state solution. Well, as you can see, occupation is ugly, is repulsive. There are no words that could describe the heinous crimes committed by the Israelis against the Palestinian people on a daily basis. The modus operandi of the Israeli occupation is to demonize the Palestinian, to dehumanize them, to the point that they will give up and just leave the country. This is their utmost strategy that they're trying to impose on the Palestinians. But if you look at the West Bank today, let alone that Israel is totally under siege, totally separated, it's suffering from basic necessities. There are 625 military checkpoints that have nothing to do with security except creating non-contiguous geographic entities, creating cantons in the West Bank with no geographic contiguities, trying to portray the Palestinians living on Indian reservations. That's the intention of the Israelis. And they claim that this apartheid wall is for security reasons. We say the apartheid wall is fine if it's put on the armistice line of 1949, where there is clear separation between, two countries, Palestine and Israel. Our country, which will be like 22% of historic Palestine, that is fine. We believe in high walls make good neighbors, that's fine. But when we see this apartheid wall being built almost 10 kilometers deep into the West Bank, it is a political message. There is no sense of security there. Because most of these settlements, most of these walls that are being built, separating one village from the other, one city from the other, is just not to create conducive conditions for people to run their own daily living. For example, if you see a student wants to go to the university, he has to start his journey 3-4 hours in order to be at that university. He has to go through, hills, muddy roads, embankments in order to reach school. So where is the sense of security when you do that? The intention here is basically occupation, making Palestinians feel miserable, dehumanizing them by using all kinds of policies that eventually would lead them to give up and leave. Now, if we look at their systematic policy of seizing identity cards of the Palestinians living in Jerusalem, coming up with all these, laws that are totally in contradistinction and in contradiction, I would say, with the human rights and what have you. And they are getting away with it for the simple fact that the United States and the international community are not really, exposed, to these systematic policies. All we talk around is current high-gear politics. But if you go and live in the West Bank and see how people live, the sense of mobility, which is non-existent, the sense of freedom of expression, which is non-existent, the sense of free trade is non-existent. The prices are high. Our economy is totally dependent on Israel. 98% of our consumer products come from Israel. How are we going to build an economically viable state when we are totally dependent on an occupying force that has been trying basically to create impediments to our infrastructural development? And that's why private sector development has always been very weak in the occupied territories, because they are not being, fully given incentives and motives to go and build, cottage industries and to boom that economy, which is, there. We have the potential in terms of agriculture, in terms of cottage industry, but Israelis, make it completely difficult. Let alone that Jerusalem today is totally, severed from the West Bank. And Jerusalem is considered to be the center for commerce, the center for health services, the center of education, and what have you. And we see like almost 2.6 million Palestinians in the West Bank, let alone 1.6 million in Gaza, don't have any kind of accessibility to visit Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is considered to be the essence of this conflict, for the simple fact all our religious sites are there, Muslim, Christians, and these people don't have even the right to go and pray in the Church of Holy Sepulchre or go and pray in the mosque, in the Haram al-Sharif and what have you. And then, they create this sense of indiscrimination that makes people very frustrated, especially when you touch them on the nerve of religion, where they cannot really practice their religion. That makes it even much more complicated. That's why when I said in the beginning this is a protracted conflict, it is a protracted conflict with so much complexity, with so much complication, that the territorial dimension is only one dimension that is engulfed with other interrelated dimensions that makes it completely difficult basically to look at. Now, the life, if you go and live there, the life is not easy. It's very expensive because, as I said, our GMP is not even 1/15 of what Israel's GMP is. Although we are buying the same basic necessities like milk, eggs, we are totally dependent on Israeli products. Yet people, cannot even manage to sell their products because they don't have accessibilities to port of entries and exit. And from that perspective, what do you expect? I, as a Palestinian, when I go to the West Bank or Gaza, I feel myself, sir, living in an open-air concentration camp. It is shameful that the international community has seen this in person. They have been to the West Bank, many of them. They have seen it on television, and it is so shameful that channels like Fox News, CNN in your country here are not really exposing the essence of this ugly and repulsive occupation because of geostrategic interests, because of the U.S. national interest that is, totally enmeshed with the Israeli agenda in the Middle East. For that reason, people here are so much ignorant about what is happening on the ground. But anybody who can go there and see with his eyes, definitely when he comes back, he becomes pro-Palestinian, because he can see the injustices inflicted upon the Palestinians in a way that it is ridiculous in the 21st century to see still a democracy that is bragging to be a bastion of democracy is one of the ugliest modern occupation in modern history, and that is the state of Israel. And Israel, when we talk about Israel from that perspective, we become terrorists, we become anti-Semitic, we become the deniers of Holocaust, all these lexicons that Israel use in order to milk the international community in terms of support. How long is the international community going to accept, this oxymoron of democracy and occupation being practiced par excellence at the same time while people are suffering, like 6 million people are suffering on a daily basis from the vestiges of this occupation. As a student of history and politics, I always learned that people make concessions at the crescendo of their power, and Israel does not seem to learn from its own history. This is the time for Israel where it believes that it has the might and the power and the backing of the international community to come forward and say, this is the time to make peace with the Palestinians. But I don't think Israel is ready for peace, because the agenda of Israel and their strategic vision, which I consider to be myopic, is not peace with the Palestinians. It's only grabbing the land and living like a pariah state with a siege mentality that will be totally isolated from what they call themselves to be part and parcel of the Middle East. Saying that, I believe we, the Palestinians, have made our big sacrifices. Since 1994, and before that, 88, since the declaration of our independence, we have given the Israelis on a golden platter the recognition not only by de jure, but by de facto and de jure together, admitting that 78% of Palestine is Israel. We have made our recognition back in 1988. What did we get in return? We did not even get recognition of Palestinian nationhood. We did not even get the position of Israel in defining their borders. We did not even get any kind of response for rectification of borders, and we did not get even the recognition that the 4th of June 1967 borders is our Palestinian state. We have recognized the state of Israel, and we have accepted to go into discussions, into negotiations since 1994 with the Oslo peace process. In return, we have seen the Israelis not responding in terms of recognizing the Palestinian nationhood. They wanted to create a clique of leadership that could really promote their own interests in running the modus vivendi, as much as not recognizing them as an authority that eventually would lead into an independent Palestinian state. When you are in total control militarily, economically, socially, politically, what kind of a regime that is working, under those circumstances could be independent? Economically, we are not independent, and politically, we are not independent, for the simple fact that, even my president, if he wants to cross from one city to another, and if there are blocks, settlements, or whatever, checking points or military checkpoints, he has to have permission to pass. Imagine. So what kind of government are we talking about here? This is a government that is just running the daily lives of the Palestinians under occupation. When we had our negotiations, it was not the authority that had the negotiations with Israel, and this makes me come back to Hamas when they say why Hamas does not recognize Israel. Why should Hamas recognize Israel? Does Fatah recognize Israel? These factions don't recognize the state of Israel. The PLO recognizes Israel. The authority is an offshoot of the agreement of Oslo, which was clinched between the PLO and Israel. So the question of recognition is with the ultimate political reference of the Palestinian people, i.e. the PLO. Now, why Hamas should recognize Israel when Israel is recognizing Hamas as a terrorist? What kind of legitimate recognition could come from a terrorist organization to a democratic state, alleged democratic state like Israel? So we shouldn't fall into the trap of this, political polemics that eventually, ultimately, the end of it is propaganda. And they talk about, the Palestinians being terrorists. I don't understand. When it comes to our right for resistance, we are terrorists. And when it comes for their right to resist, they are, liberators. And that's why they liberate the independence of Israel in 1948, while, most of these gangs, like Stern, Leahy, Haganah, and what have you, they were, gangs, killing people, terrorists. Nobody then talked about them as terrorists, and today they talk about them as, of course, freedom fighters. Anyway, this is the propaganda machine that the Zionists have all over the world. And it is unfortunate that the United States, which for its geostrategic interests, and I could elaborate on that in details, has this tie, which is organic tie with Israel, where the convergence of their interests in the Middle East is totally compatible with the overlook of the US and its role in the Middle East. Israel is also considered to be a police for the United States. And I think, as I always coin this metaphor, I say Israel's relationship with the United States is like a Catholic marriage. There is no divorce. But when you talk about, the relationship of the United States with the Arab world and with Arab regimes, ancien regime at least, it's a relationship of a lover to a mistress with no strings attached. We do understand why the Americans are interested in the Middle East. It's oil, it's all kinds of things, economic reasons, and in the final analysis, of course, they would support the state of Israel, because the state of Israel is considered to be a domestic issue in the United States. So the decision-making process in the U.S. has always to factor the domestic issue that is Israel, which is a part and parcel of that. So any foreign policy decision-making has to factor Israel because, of course, of the lobbying, because of the neoconservatives position, because of the Christian Zionists. If you put all these groups together, they could become a very potential force of, pressure on the United States decision-making process. So it is not easy for us to change those perceptions. And of course, all these ideas are being beefed more and more by a directed, I would say, media like Fox News, CNN to a certain degree. Sometimes the international, brings some stories about Palestine, but in the final analysis, even the written newspapers and what have you are totally biased, for Israel. From that perspective, I go back and I say we have accepted the state of Israel, and we still do believe in the two-state solution. And in order to be brief, I will tell you, our bid for statehood to the United Nations is just to confirm, to embolden, and to bolster, basically, that we are still believing in a two-state solution. We still believe that the 1967 borders is the state of Palestine, future state of Palestine. I must be very frank with you. We have been instructed not basically to comment on the Arab Spring, but I will put the academic hat and not the diplomatic hat in answering this question. Of course, the Arab Spring did not surprise the Arab world, neither the Palestinians. This was a long overdue uprising, because if you look at the history of the Arab world, for the last 60 years, all these regimes lacked legitimacy and credibility, and most of them came as a result of coups d'etats. There has always been a wide gulf of inequity between the political systems and their civil societies. There were never any kind of synchronization as we define the political system, the input-output analysis. So there were certain kind of alienation, economic, political, social alienation, that the Arab world were living under such regimes. It was inevitable that, the voice of protest and reason would come down the pipeline. And I was a little bit worried that it should have been much sooner than this, but it is happening on the ground. You see, this polemical discourse between choosing between secularism and fundamentalism have been going on since Napoleon's invasion to Egypt, since 1798, when the Arab world, with Muhammad Ali as the governor of Egypt then, was stunned and baffled to see the modern developments of the West and how he could perceive, Egypt and the Mamluks living at a time where they thought they were the leading civilization, Islam as being the banner of the leading civilization. So since then, the Arabs were impacted by the Enlightenment period of Europe, and they started introducing the concepts of nation states, and what have you. And the idea of trying to moderate Islam within the context of modernization, within the concept of westernization, has been a major challenge for Arab political thinkers, let alone philosophers. Now, we have been struggling with these issues for the last 250 years. If you ask me now, still we are vacillating between secularism and between fundamentalism. The failure of secularism by de facto gives boost to the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. And Islamic fundamentalism per se uses all the tools of democracy, not believing in democracy, because ideologically Islam does not believe in democracy, Islam does not believe in nation states, Islam believes in universalism. And the question of religion here is very important for the Islamists, because if they believe that the Islamic State is going to come into existence, then there won't be elections, there will be always consensus, which is ijma' in Arabic, and there will never be majority rule, minority right. However, the Islamists today are using the tools of Western democracy by nominating themselves for elections and by winning elections. And by doing that, basically, they will come to power. Once they grip that power, they are going to stay there to push their own social and religious agenda. And it will never be, a political agenda that will eventually lead to the modernization process as we perceive it should be. Saying that, I see the rise of the youth in the Arab world, the highly educated, who are affected by the Facebook mentality, who are engaged with internet and what have you. They have played a dominant role, as a matter of fact, a pertinent role in the process of this uprising. And this uprising will subside, basically, because we have seen that the old guards have taken over this young generation movement. And from that perspective, I don't want to sound to be pessimistic, but I am an optimist by nature. In the near future, I think, there won't be draconian changes on the political scene in Tunisia or Egypt and what have you. But I can see it down the pipeline. 10 years from now, I can see the dramatic changes that are going to take place. Because it will take some time for this youth to regroup, to organize into a political party that could have a certain strategic vision with an ideology of how to rebuild that state and how to create that nexus between the civil society and those political systems. Now, the impact on Palestine, of course, it is there. The first impact is that, the Palestinians wanted to start the reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah. I think that was the immediate impact. And as a result of that, we saw the ramifications of that impact, happening between, Hamas and Fatah meeting time and again in Cairo. We believe that eventually this reconciliation is inevitable. I always was with the idea, as we coined the Latin word in divisa manent, united we stand and divided we fall. And I think this, factionalism between Hamas and Fatah had tremendous impact. It had really played negatively in our approach to the Israeli conflict. And that in itself, gave wrong impressions to the world that if the Palestinians are divided, how the hell are they going to have their own independent state? Now, saying that, I see that the Palestinian spring will always be anti-occupation. It's not going to be anti-Palestinian. Now, if we were in the process of having a state, and if we ended up a replica of another Arab state, I would tell you the Arab Spring would have started in Palestine and not in Tunisia. The possibility of a two-state solution, given the present circumstances, still doable. Because we're not talking about permanent walls that could stay. We don't talk about permanent settlements that could stay. You know, all these settlements, all these walls could be dismantled. If the Berlin Wall was torn down, I mean, this wall could be torn down. But the question here, whether the intention of Israel wants to make peace, or it wants peace for the sake of peace. And peace for the sake of peace is not going to fly, because the Palestinians have been determined to have their own independent state. It is doable if the Israelis want that. If Israel doesn't want that, then I will see it with the continuous settlement activities. Today, we have almost 650,000 settlers living in Jerusalem, its environs, and the West Bank. And we're talking about hundreds of settlements. Those could be dismantled. We have agreed in second-track negotiations, and I've been involved in many of those second-track negotiations, at least 50 of them. Believe me, all these, what we call final status issues, with Israelis, we have come into agreements, and we know exactly what the solutions are. But basically, the lack of political will, nobody wants to ring the bell. Israel is not ready. Why Israel is not ready? Because Israel is totally being dislocated as a society that is becoming a right-wing society, with the religious parties taking the upper hands, with the settlers taking the upper hands. I don't see any solution coming in the very near future. And these settlements will grow like cancerous in order to make it irreversible, even if we have negotiations with the Israelis. So the two-state solution is only a solution, but if it continues like that, I think, it will be impossible. Our suggestion would always be a one-state solution, and I think that will be the ideal for Israel, for Palestine, and for all the minorities, whether national, religious, living there. You're talking about 3 monotheistic religions there with 2 nationalities at loggerheads. I mean, how more beautiful could it be if we have a secular one-state state that could encompass basically all these religious and national minorities? One-state solution, very simple. It's not a one-state solution a la style Israelian, where they want us to be Red Indians doing their menial jobs. That's not occupation plus. One-state solution meaning one man, one vote. It's very simple.